From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
House Republicans make a push for H.R. 1, a plan to turn on the taps of American energy. But what's in it, and can any parts of this bill pass the Democratic Senate and get signed into law? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua and columnist Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. Last week, the GOP's House leaders held a press conference to argue for their bill to increase fossil fuel production and much more. Let's listen to a bit of Majority Leader Steve Scalise making his case.
We're bringing H.R. 1, the Lower Energy Costs Act, and it's focused on lowering energy costs for families that have been out of control and putting in sound, responsible policies that actually allow us to produce energy in America. You've seen the results of President Biden's attack on American energy. It's been severe. It started day one, the day that President Biden took the oath of office. He took very specific steps to attack American energy, and immediately you saw costs going up. Today, costs at the pump for gasoline are 40% higher than the day Joe Biden took office. People, when they pay their household electricity bills, depending on where they live, are paying 20 to 40% higher for their electricity costs. And of course, it's a major driver of inflation when they go to the grocery store or anywhere else. The cost of everything is up because of Joe Biden's anti-American energy strategies.
Monet, this is a 174-page bill, and it looks like it was built by collating a dozen and a half or so other pieces of legislation on critical minerals, permitting, onshore energy production, and so forth. Can you give us some sense in a nutshell of what is in this bill and what House Republicans are trying to accomplish?
The main focus of the bill is to lower the cost of energy by making it easier to produce and easier to trade. I think that that's become a priority for most Americans over the course of the past couple of years. As Steve Scalise was pointing out, Americans saw massive run-ups in the cost of electricity and also gas during the great inflation period that culminated last year. And in general, really want to make sure that we're not going to see those kinds of wild price spikes in the future. And so H.R. 1 would, A, make it easier to trade the energy that American companies are already producing. It would waive the Energy Department's ability to block contracts for the import and export of natural gas. Right now, companies have to ask for specific permits to conduct trade. It would make it much easier for them to trade freely. It also wants to make sure that energy companies are able to dispose of their materials in a responsible manner, but not necessarily be burdened by years and years worth of compliance requirements. Right now, the Clean Water Act has a very burdensome process for how energy companies can set up their plants for refining and make sure that they're not dumping too many contaminants into the water. But the Trump administration reformed this process a little bit through an EPA rulemaking, and H.R. 1 basically wants to build on what the Trump administration did and say, we're still going to conduct these reviews and make sure that the very worst contaminants aren't going in, but we understand that these companies know a lot about how to dispose of their materials responsibly, and we're going to make it easier for them to do so. And then the biggest thing on top of all of these smaller tweaks is permitting reform, which I'm sure we'll get into more in the future. That's something that has been a priority for Republicans, making it easier to build projects for the extraction of energy and also the transmission. So that's things like pipelines and wells. There are a lot of Democrats who are also interested too, but they've failed so far to propose any plan that can clear both houses of Congress and also that would actually address the root of the problem by making it difficult for some of these environmentalist groups to tie up these projects in litigation. So those are all some of the major components of the bill that House Republicans are preparing to pass.
But part of what's going on here, as always in a divided Congress, is party messaging. And so just a quick note on the designation. This legislation is H.R. 1. It is the number one bill as it has been numbered by the House Republicans. And that's something parties do to give the public a sense of what their priorities were. Recall what H.R. 1 was in the last Congress. It was the For the People Act. This was Nancy Pelosi's voting bill, including ballot harvesting and mandating late mail ballots be accepted and so forth. That didn't pass. But Kim, it's a way for the party in power to give some prominence to what it wants to accomplish and to signal to the public what the party stands for, and that's particularly important here now as we head into the 2024 elections.
Yeah, I mean, look, Republicans know that high energy prices are something that are really hurting. And they hurt, by the way, just about everyone in the country, because pretty much everyone in the country needs to buy a gallon of gas. They have to heat their homes. They're watching their electricity prices go up, home heating oil prices go up, gasoline, and that hurts a lot on the budget. So they feel as though this is a very good thing to highlight as they are kicking off their ownership again of the House. It's also a way to focus on what any reasonable person would call some of Joe Biden's crazier actions. This White House has been over the top in terms of its agenda, and the Republicans in this case are trying to highlight some of those crazier decisions. So, for instance, this legislation has a sense of the House condemning the president on his decision to veto the Keystone pipeline. And they also know, and this is the other reason they are going forward with this bill as it's their first priority, that there is a little bit of interest from some people in the Senate for some of the changes. Look, this overall bill doesn't have a chance of ever getting approved by this president, but as a beginning negotiation piece, it's a decent place to start because it has a lot on permitting reform, not just cleaning up the process by which people can litigate already approved projects, but taking a look at the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, changing some definitions of what projects fall under it, etc. Now, obviously, this is something that Joe Manchin in the Senate, a Democrat, has also been interested in doing. He got stiff-armed by the White House after he agreed to the Inflation Reduction Act. He was supposed to get a vote on his permitting reform. That hasn't gone anywhere, really. And so, this is an opportunity for Republicans to try to get some bipartisan pressure to do some more in some of these key areas.
But part of the Republican message here, it seems to me, and not to sound like a broken record on this, is that the reality is the United States and the world are still going to need fossil fuels for a while. And I would point to an Associated Press story that came out yesterday. Here's the top of it. Electricity generated from renewables surpassed coal in the United States for the first time in 2022. The U.S. Energy Information Administration announced Monday. It says growth in wind and solar significantly drove the increase in renewable energy. So the overall figures are that solar was 14% of electricity, hydropower was 6%, and biomass and geothermal were under 1%. And that point that the AP writer makes, that the growth of solar is what is driving this, may be true in the short term. But if you zoom out and look at the underlying data from the Energy Information Administration, in 2010, coal was far and away the largest source of electricity in the United States. It was roughly double the number two, which is natural gas. And over the last 12, 13 years, those two lines have traded places and they're crossing almost like an X. And so, yes, renewables are rising. And I think there's a lot of conservatives that don't have a problem with that. If they can compete in the market, why not turn some sunlight into electrons? But the real macro story over a decade and a half is that we've replaced a lot of coal with a lot of natural gas. And now in 2022, natural gas was 39% of electricity production. And then, Monet, I would add to that the second thing, which is that we're only talking about electricity here, which is not even including jet fuel or gasoline or plastics or chemical production or any of the other very incredibly useful things that fossil fuels do to contribute to modern life.
Yeah, I think looking at that chart you referenced of the sources of electricity production over the past couple decades or so, you can see coal declining and you can see renewables and natural gas rising, natural gas being much higher, but they're rising basically in step with one another, renewables and natural gas. And I think that there's an important symbolism there in that, yes, renewables are becoming more efficient as time goes on, and they're naturally going to make up a part of a lot of regional grids, but they are unreliable. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, as we point out again and again. And so that means that even in places where renewables are being deployed en masse, you're still going to have significant increase in natural gas usage. It's not as if natural gas is going to decrease in step with renewables, because you have to always have that capacity ready to go online whenever the renewables are not meeting the energy needs of that particular region. And so it makes sense that natural gas still should be seen as the main source that we're betting on to be the center of electricity generation in this country for the next couple decades or so at least.
But the other frustrating thing about this conversation that the nation keeps having to me is that there are some real climate and emissions gains in that story. If you replace coal electricity generation with natural gas generation, the climate folks should love that because natural gas burns significantly cleaner than coal. And so I don't know why that no one seems to be interested in that story. The Journal had a recent editorial on Germany, and it says that coal has risen as a share of Germany's electricity production to 33.3%, up about 3 points from 2021, and part of that is the war in Ukraine and halting of natural gas imports to Russia. But Kim, we're talking about a third of a serious ally's electricity production, and I don't know why there isn't more interest in saying, let's have a 4 or 5 year agenda where the United States is going to aim to make up a significant chunk of their electricity production and fuel that with American fracked natural gas.
Yeah, and by the way, this is a long time story. If you look back, there have been years the United States has been the leader in carbon reductions, if this is what you care about, CO2 reductions, because of that transition to natural gas from coal. And by the way, for a long time, the environmental community was also in favor of this. Remember the not so far ago days when we were all referring to natural gas as a bridge fuel, in that everyone understood that we were not going to turn to renewables overnight for a whole number of reasons and problems, and that this was nonetheless a way to certainly be producing energy in a much cleaner fashion. By the way, not just in terms of CO2 emissions, but natural gas burns cleaner in terms of a host of all other kind of particulates, et cetera, that are associated with coal. Now, coal has gotten better over the years and cleaner itself too, but there still is a real difference. And, we also have the example, as you say, of what happened in Europe, which decided to overnight attempt to go heavily renewable. But when the wind stops blowing, when Vladimir Putin decides to withhold natural gas and other fossil fuels from them, the only way that they've been able to make up the difference is to refire up those coal plants, which, again, if you care about the climate, is going backward. And that's why, one of the most important aspects of this legislation is this elimination of controls on natural gas, liquid natural gas exports. We have seen what happened when we got rid of our oil export ban a couple of years ago. When we got rid of the ban on oil a couple of years ago, a lot of people get the economics of this backward, including potentially the president of the United States. Progressives were asking Biden to actually ban exports because the thinking goes that, well, if prices are high, that means there's not enough and we should keep everything in the United States here for us. But what we know from the end of that oil export ban is that when there's global demand and prices are high, it drives domestic investment here in the U.S. and production here goes up. And so that would be one kind of useful aspect of getting rid of these export controls, again, on natural gas, is not only could we aid our allies, but we would likely be aiding ourselves in terms of more production here, and more production potentially meaning we could convert yet more of those coal plants into natural gas ones.